That was absolutely beautiful to the Gilly clan. And Annie, I have no words. You just really nailed that. And we're looking forward to seeing you nail that again. So very much looking forward to what you've got in the next instalment. This week, it was interesting. A Catholic, Baptist, Anglican, Church of Christ uniting group walked into a cafe. Now, it's not a joke. It's actually what happened on Thursday. So it was a little gathering of local pastors, ministers, vicars. I'm not sure what else people are referred to as. It was a really great opportunity to catch up with some people at Greensborough Bookstore. So we just had a table there, and it was my first experience gathering with the local ministers fraternal. And what was interesting was, this is an aside, but I have to tell you, Father Terry, who's from Montmorency, he's the Catholic priest there, although on his way out to retirement, is just the most fabulous guy. And probably, no, without a doubt, the highlight of this gathering was chatting with him about his dozen years at Montmorency, but he's, I think, probably close to 50 years in ministry. The most caring and humble man you could ever meet. That's an aside. I just had to give a shout out to Father Terry because he is amazing. But in the discussions that surrounded what it's been like over the last 12 months and then coming, up until Friday, coming back to do services live, one of the things that came out of that discussion was someone mentioned that what seems to be missing is the energy and creativity that comes with people gathered together in community. So one minister mentioned that, often there'll be a knock on his office door and someone will say, "Oh, I've got this idea." That's not happening yet. And there was a general consensus, a general nod about that's not back yet. And part of that is we don't know what's coming up, as we've since seen. But part of it is this general lack of vision for what could be coming up, that walking through the valleys and not quite knowing what's going to come out at you. And for many people, that's not only a COVID-related thing, that's all the associated issues that surround that. So it was just an interesting discussion. I have to say, and again, this is an aside, but Alex Zav seems to be missing that boat because his creativity seems to be flourishing, and I reckon that's got something to do with 3 kids being at school. However, for most people, there is a not quite there yet when it comes to getting back to whatever normal is, to whatever creativity looks like. Put that little scene aside. A week before that, a little mini preaching team gathered at McDonald's Eltham to discuss what preaching and devotion series we would have between now and Easter. And we started the year in Matthew, so decided to keep in Matthew. And then there was, long story short, a discussion about the fact that not only would we stick with Matthew, but it would be this theme of Matthew and mountains. So very significant things happen on mountains in the book of Matthew. The Bible is very symbolic, and obviously there's often a lot of themes behind themes. So this idea that we would focus on what is happening on mountains. Now, what draws those two scenes together in my mind is the fact that we are very much, many of us, experiencing valleys at the moment. I don't know many people who are having sort of mountaintop experiences. Not many people who are living consistently with their eyes lifted above their circumstances. Many of us feel like we are pretty much bogged down in our circumstances. And so this idea of the creativity being missing, with this discussion with pastors and ministers, and this idea that we sense this call to be looking at mountains. They are related themes, and we read Psalm 121 this morning, and obviously in there's this idea of lifting our eyes above what we're living and lifting our eyes to where our help comes from. very relevant for our time, our difficulties, for the confusion that we find in society and often in our own families, and the pain that we might be experiencing. So we're going to spend some time leading up to Easter looking at Matthew and looking at mountains and seeing what God has to say to us in this chaotic world, in this confused world. What is God saying to his people about his call, about what we are to be doing that's different? If you've got a Bible there, and this is not the verse we're going to be focusing on, but I just want to read this as a bit of a lead-in. Colossians 3, verse 1 and 2. And this is from the Message, because when I popped it open on my phone this morning, it opened up to the Message, and I thought, I actually really like this version. So we'll read this in the Message version. We'll also read our Matthew passage from the Message version. Feel free to go back during the week and read them in the NIV or whatever version you normally read. So Colossians chapter 3, verses 1 and 2. So if you're serious about living this new resurrection life with Christ, act like it. Pursue the things over which Christ presides. Don't shuffle along, eyes to the ground, absorbed with the things right in front of you. Look up and be alert to what is going on around Christ. That's where the action is. See things from his perspective. Now, it would be easy after reading those verses to think that there is a guilt or it's terrible if you're bogged down in your circumstances. For many of us, those circumstances are really difficult, and there's no sense of guilt that's supposed to be associated with this idea of lift up your eyes. But it is a call to lift our eyes. It is a call to be, perhaps stay in the valley. Many of us are experiencing a valley, but to lift our perspective. And that's not about guilt, that's about help, that's about perspective, and that's about us being able to endure circumstances. We've sort of been a little bit further along in Matthew. Now we're going back a tiny bit, and we're just briefly going to have a look at Matthew 4, verses 1 to 11. And this is the story of the testing of Jesus after 40 days of fasting in the wilderness. So just grab that if you can. Matthew chapter 4 and starting at verse 1. Next, and of course we have to think about what happened before. So Jesus has just been baptized. Next, Jesus was taken into the wild by the Spirit for the test. Remember, Message version. It might seem unfamiliar. The devil was ready to give the test. Jesus prepared for the test by fasting 40 days and 40 nights. That left him, of course, in a state of extreme hunger, which the devil took advantage of in the first test. Since you are God's son, he said, speak the word that will turn these stones into loaves of bread. Jesus answered him by quoting Deuteronomy. It takes more than bread to stay alive. It takes a steady stream of words from God's mouth. For the second test, the devil took him to the holy city. He sat him on top of the temple and said, since you are God's son, jump. The devil goaded him by quoting Psalm 91. He has placed you in the care of his angels. They will catch you so that you won't as much stub your toe on a stone. Jesus countered with another citation from Deuteronomy. Don't you dare test the Lord your God. For the third test, the devil took him to the peak of a huge mountain. He gestured expansively, pointing out all the earth's kingdoms, how glorious they all were. Then he said, they're yours, all of it. Just go down on your knees and worship me, and they're yours. Jesus' refusal was curt. Get lost, Satan. He backed his rebuke with a third quotation from Deuteronomy. Worship the Lord your God, and only him. Serve him with absolute single-heartedness. The test was over. The devil left, and in his place, angels came and took care of Jesus' needs. There's a few questions in my mind about those verses and things that we won't answer them today. but they always sit often at the back of our minds, and it's just worth addressing them. Was this 40-day fast 40 full days and nights of fasting, or was it more like a common fast back then, which was a fast during the day and eating at night? Mind you, there's probably not a lot in the wilderness at night. Just a question that sits in my mind. Another question, is Satan physically present for this, or is this vision, is this in Jesus' mind? We get the impression that he's present, but we don't 100% know. And the third question in my mind, where did Jesus tell this story? Because he must have told this story, because there's no one else present for it. So for it to be written down, it must have been presented somewhere. In my mind, this is how I imagine it presented. Jesus sitting around a campfire at night with his disciples, just saying, guys, I've got a story to tell you. And unpacking these 3 tests that Satan had given him. And I can well imagine that the disciples would have had way more than 3 questions. And we don't get the privilege of hearing all those answers or it being completely unfolded. What we have is what's in front of us. And I don't want to focus on the first 2 tests today. In my mind, this whole idea of mountains in Matthew leads us to this 3rd test. This idea that Satan offers Jesus all the power he wants. He can have all the power, all the kingdoms, if he'll bow down and worship Satan. Tests come often as a result of what we're experiencing, and I can imagine that 3 decades of humble earthly living for Jesus would have been challenging, to say the least. He had given up so much of his power to be on earth. And so you would be missing, wouldn't you, that relationship with your Father, just that sense of not being human with all that comes with that. The humility that he had to take on, the power he gave up. And so Satan comes to him and says, well, you can have it all back. You can have it all back. And I know that when we're in precarious situations, when we find ourselves in situations which are hard, which are difficult, which are valleys, which provide us with a whole lot of unknowns, we want to be in charge. We want to take some power. And you've probably sat like I've sat, having coffee with a friend or hearing something on the news and thinking, oh, if only I was in charge, it wouldn't be like that. If I was running the government, ... If I was running that organisation, if I was teaching that class, if I was, and you name it, we think to ourselves, give me a little bit of power in this situation, give me control over that, and I will do a much better job than whoever's there at the time. Those of us who've lived long enough know that that's pretty much a lie. That us being in control, us being in charge of things is not going to make for a better scenario. And as we look at this story of Jesus, as he just bats away this 3rd test and says, this is not how I choose to change the world. The way that I'm bringing hope and reconciliation in this world is not through taking charge. Despite the fact that everyone who thought the Messiah was coming was under the absolute impression that it was going to come through someone barging in and taking control over the injustice. That's not how Jesus chose to come. And we know that. We know that from this moment on, as he bats away that 3rd test, he continues to walk humbly. He continues to serve. He continues to take that slow walk to the cross. So we think of corruption, we think of injustice, and we think governments, we think Hitler, we think the extreme, but so much of our lives can be spent trying to have power, trying to have control. From prep, you see it in the playground, that 1 or 2 kids trying to manipulate what's going on so they can be in charge. Right through the nursing home, where there's people trying to take control over who does what and what the nurses do and how they're going to be looked after. It's in all of us. It's in our families where we try and take control. We try and have power. It's in our workplaces. It's in our schools. And Lord Acton, he had a famous quote: "Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely." It is so true, from the playground to the nursing home. We all want the power. And we see Jesus standing on that mountain being offered all the power. He rejects it. And I think as we start this series on mountains, and in Matthew, on mountain living, on lifting our eyes, the first thing we need to understand is that being on a mountain or looking to the mountains or looking to God is not about power. It's not about gaining power. It's not about regaining power. It's not about running anything better than anybody else. It's not about us. It's about humility. It's about serving. It's about batting away those tests that come and say, you can take control of this. You can have control. You can have the power. It's about looking at Jesus' response, who says, you're called to worship the Lord. You're called to do the everyday, to live humbly and to walk in the ways of Jesus. So mountain living is not about gaining as much power as possible. We've seen that in Christian circles. We've seen that in governments and in schools and in workplaces. We've seen it everywhere. Let's reject that today and let's say we will live humbly, worshipping our God. We will live in the way that Jesus lived. He saw all the vast expanse. He was offered it all, and he said, I'm going to worship God and I'm going to walk to the cross. So what that means for us in the day-to-day is that we are looking to the way that Jesus is leading us to live. We're not seeking power, we're seeking Jesus. And as I reflected on this, as I thought about what this strange combination of lifting our eyes, of living on the mountain, but living humbly, there's only one image that came into my mind. Raf's going to pop it up on the screen. It was given with permission from Kate. Kate, I don't know whether your friend gave permission, so we've blanked out her face. This is Kate doing extreme ironing. I know, bizarre, and I've always seen it on her Facebook profile picture and gone, what the heck? She explained to me that extreme ironing is an extreme sport where people take their ironing boards into these difficult or extreme locations, and it combines the thrills of an extreme outdoor activity with the satisfaction of a well-pressed shirt. I just ponder that. It's bizarre. But this image came into my mind because I thought about this mountaintop living. This idea that we are lift your eyes, the Colossians verses, we are in Christ, we are already on that mountain in a sense. And yet, what are we doing as we join with Christ, as we live with Christ? We're doing the ironing, we're doing the everyday, we're doing the humble walk. We're reading our Bible and coming to know and understand and be absorbed in who Jesus was and what he did on earth. And it might look a little like this combination of we are living in the extreme, we're living in the eternal perspective that we've been given in our reconciliation with Jesus, and we're doing the normal everyday activities. So as we start this series in Matthew, and we've sort of already done it a little bit, let's keep this image of Kate in our minds. We are living with our eyes fixed on Jesus, on the mountain, in Christ, but we're doing the everyday, and we're doing it with humility and with the strength given from Jesus, even when we feel like we're in those dark valleys. So let's pray as we finish this part. We've got one more song to come. And let's be reflecting on those things. Let's be reading through Matthew together as we think about what it means to be living as a Christian in this day and age, in this crazy, chaotic time, as we look for the hope that is found in Jesus.